It begins in the cold Kremlin corridors, 2:14 a.m. Moscow time, when a confidential document marked highest priority lands on the president's desk. The warning inside is blunt, almost frantic. Russia is on the brink of a civil fracture. Not from foreign pressure, not from sanctions, but from inside, within its own elite, within its own military, within its own streets. Hours earlier, a senior Kremlin official, one of Putin's own advisors responsible for monitoring social stability, released a public article declaring that civil war is now one of the biggest challenges facing Russia. He didn't whisper it behind closed doors. He published it in a state-aligned outlet for 146 million Russians to see. At the same moment, Ukrainian drones moving at 120 miles per hour smashed into Russian positions near Prokhorovsk. Russian soldiers sprinted for cover. Commanders shouted threats, pro-war bloggers accused the Kremlin of lying, and on Telegram, young Russians posted anti-war songs reaching over 3.2 million views in a single evening. But then came the detail no one expected. Russia's leadership crisis is not driven only by battlefield failures. It's driven by dynastic consolidation. According to multiple investigative reports, the Kremlin has now elevated 24 relatives of the president into official positions, the highest number in a century. For many Russians, this feels less like a government and more like the formation of an empire-family hybrid. Inside Moscow, public trust is collapsing. Inflation is climbing past 12%. War fatigue has reached 83%, according to newly released polls. Anonymous state employees are leaking documents, and security services are preparing for unrest, with record spending increases tracked by Western analysts. And then, when the Kremlin believed the situation couldn't escalate further, the unthinkable happened. To understand why Moscow is trembling, the events must be placed inside a longer arc. An arc of wars, collapses, and political overreach that has defined Russia for more than a century. The Kremlin official who triggered the alarm is not a fringe commentator. He is the head of the Presidential Executive Office for Analysis of Social Processes, a senior sociologist whose full-time mission is to detect early signs of instability. His declaration that Russia is facing the risk of civil conflict echoes patterns documented by Reuters, BBC, and DW: declining public trust, elite fractures, economic pressure, and prolonged military engagement. This is not the first time Russia has stood at a crossroads like this. In 1914, Russia entered a war it believed would be short. Within 3 years, the monarchy collapsed, the economy imploded, and a revolution swept through cities and barracks. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. By 1989, it was withdrawing in exhaustion. 2 years later, the entire Soviet system dissolved. Today, Russia is engaged in the longest conflict it has sustained since the Soviet era, longer than its campaigns in Chechnya and far more expensive than its operations in Syria. But the contrast driving the current crisis is sharper than at any point in recent history. A war portrayed as a 3-day operation has stretched into nearly 4 years, costing Russia tens of billions of dollars and thousands of armored vehicles, according to Defense News and Jane's Defense Weekly. In Ukraine, small teams with low-cost drones are disabling multi-million-dollar Russian systems. A $2,000 quadcopter can strike a $3 million tank. A $40,000 Ukrainian long-range drone can hit an oil refinery worth billions. This asymmetry, cheap versus costly, fast versus slow, defines the modern battlefield and humiliates Russia's old military doctrine. Inside Russia, the contradictions are even starker. Polling aggregated by independent researchers and Western media indicates that 56% of Russians now feel very tired of the war, while 83% report broad war fatigue. Meanwhile, state media insists everything is under control. Officials promise stability, propagandists demand unity, and yet the same propagandists have begun warning openly about approaching turbulence, mirroring the Kremlin officials' claims almost word for word. At the heart of the divide lies a question Russia has answered poorly for decades. Who gets the power? Moscow claims the country needs a merit-based leadership system, but investigative reporting shows that nepotism has surged to its highest level in 100 years, with relatives and trusted loyalists elevated far above more capable candidates. The contrast is impossible for ordinary Russians to miss. While elite families consolidate power, soldiers on the front line record video messages begging for proper gear. While officials expand personal security budgets, families in Siberia cut firewood to survive winter. This is the landscape of contradictions. Public fatigue versus state denial. Modern drones versus outdated doctrine. Elite privilege versus battlefield chaos. A landscape that, in Russia's past, has repeatedly preceded something larger, something turbulent, something historic. And now, all signs suggest the cycle may be repeating once again. The escalation began quietly, almost invisibly, before it erupted into something Moscow could no longer control. It started with murmurs on Telegram, soldiers refusing orders, commanders threatening their own men, and war bloggers demanding proof from the Kremlin itself. Then the murmurs became fractures, and the fractures became a chain reaction. The first mini-climax came in early November 2025. Russian forces near Prokhorovsk, a city Putin claimed was fully surrounded, began posting videos contradicting the official narrative. Ukrainian drones flew overhead at least 60 times per day, according to battlefield analysts. In one viral clip verified by BBC journalists, 3 drones struck the same position in under 40 seconds. Soldiers scrambled, shouting warnings, while a 4th drone hovered above the burning rooftop waiting to strike again. The gap between Moscow's announcements and battlefield reality had never been more visible. The second escalation arrived from inside the Kremlin itself. A respected, high-ranking official publicly stated that Russia could face a political system collapse if the war continued. His warning was direct. A prolonged conflict leads to economic crisis, which leads to social crisis, which then evolves into political crisis. Nearly identical language appeared in multiple Russian talk shows, clearly coordinated yet shockingly blunt. One host even referenced 1916, reminding viewers that only 3 years of unpopular war had brought the monarchy to its knees. Then came the twist no one expected. Pro-war propagandists, usually the loudest defenders of the Kremlin, began demanding accountability. They accused the Ministry of Defense of systematic misreporting, pointing to gaps between Putin's claims and the reality on the ground. One major war blogger with over 1.7 million subscribers asked publicly, "Where is the proof? Show us the actual encirclement." His post reached 12 million views in less than 24 hours. It was the first time in years that loyal propagandists openly challenged the president's statements. A third eruption unfolded inside the Russian elite. Investigations published by Western outlets revealed that 24 relatives of the president had been elevated into significant government or corporate roles. This triggered outrage not only among opposition circles, but within nationalist communities, groups that typically support the war. They accused the Kremlin of using the conflict to consolidate a family dynasty rather than secure victory on the battlefield. The Kremlin tried to downplay the findings, but leaked documents, circulating rapidly across Telegram channels, validated every detail. By mid-month, another twist emerged. Russian financial executives quietly admitted that the economy was returning to 1990s-style barter dynamics, with factories trading goods instead of using cash, an indicator of severe liquidity problems. Analysts at several Western institutions confirmed the pattern, pointing to soaring security budgets and shrinking consumer spending. Inflation climbed above 12%, with some regions reporting shortages of key goods. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Ukrainian drone units published new footage showing drones entering trenches, bunkers, and even armored vehicles, no longer just striking from above but hunting targets at close range. Jane's Defense Weekly described it as the most significant battlefield adaptation since the introduction of loitering munitions. Russian units were overwhelmed. Entire squads began operating with makeshift armor plates and improvised drone shields, a sign that official logistics were being outpaced by Ukrainian innovation. The fourth escalation point came when a leaked poll, later confirmed by independent researchers, showed that 83% of Russians felt exhausted by the war. Trust in the Kremlin's information had fallen sharply, and for the first time since February 2022, more Russians described their living conditions as worse rather than stable. Across major cities, videos appeared showing officers berating troops, threatening punishment for disobedience. One widely circulated clip captured a commander shouting that he would personally shoot anyone who refuses orders. The footage infuriated military families and fueled further distrust toward leadership. Then came the most dramatic twist. A prominent defense executive, someone deeply tied to Russia's weapons industry, warned that the country was approaching a 1991-style systemic collapse. His remarks spread quickly. And though state media attempted to silence the story, the transcript circulated on encrypted channels, triggering panic discussions among regional officials. The Kremlin responded, as it always has, by increasing spending on internal security. According to leaked budget details covered by major outlets, Russia is planning record-level funding for policing, intelligence agencies, and domestic surveillance, surpassing levels seen in the 2000s. Economists warned that such spending is unsustainable, but for the Kremlin, survival now outweighs fiscal caution. As winter approached, the situation escalated again. Several major oil facilities, critical to Russia's wartime revenue, were struck by Ukrainian long-range drones, each costing under $50,000. Reuters reported that some facilities would require months to restore, cutting into export capacity when Russia desperately needed cash. Each twist pushed the system closer to stress. Each event amplified distrust. Each revelation fueled the narrative that Russia was entering a dangerous period not seen since the final years of the Soviet Union. And with every passing week, the pressure continued to rise. The events shaking Russia are not isolated cracks. They form a structural breakdown, economic, military, and social, now recognized by analysts across Reuters, BBC, DW, and multiple defense institutions. What began as a battlefield struggle has transformed into a full-spectrum national crisis, affecting everything from GDP projections to troop morale to elite cohesion. The impact is cascading through the system, and each layer amplifies the next. Economically, Russia is under its heaviest pressure since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. According to Western financial assessments, the country's wartime spending has risen to over 40% of its federal budget, an unsustainable ratio for a nation whose energy revenues are diminishing. Drone strikes on refineries and ports, verified by Reuters, have reduced export capacity during peak winter demand. Several damaged facilities require 4 to 6 months to repair, and even temporary shutdowns reduce Russia's cash flow by millions of dollars per day. With sanctions tightening and oil price caps being enforced more aggressively by the US and EU, Moscow's alternatives are narrowing. This strain explains why Russian financial institutions quietly admitted recovering 1990s-style barter practices, a signal that liquidity is drying up across key sectors. Factories are trading goods, fuel for metal, machinery for food, because cash is increasingly scarce. DW analysts noted that this only happens when banks cannot provide stable credit. And Russia's central bank, operating under inflation rates above 12%, has limited room to stabilize the ruble without draining reserves that are already under pressure. The military impact is even more severe. The prolonged campaign has altered Russia's combat doctrine in ways not seen in decades. Jane's Defense Weekly confirms that Ukrainian drones have forced Russian units to abandon traditional formations and adopt small squad tactics designed for survival rather than offense. But this reactive posture creates a strategic imbalance. Ukraine can field thousands of drones costing under $5,000 each, while Russia continues to lose hardware valued at tens of millions. Analysts describe it as economically asymmetric warfare, a battle Russia cannot win without overwhelming industrial advantage, an advantage it no longer possesses. Meanwhile, troop fatigue is reaching critical levels. Intelligence assessments shared with Western media indicate that refusal rates among Russian units continue to rise. Videos of commanders threatening their own men reflect deeper problems: distrust, desperation, and uneven discipline across the lines. Research cited by BBC's Russia analysis team suggests that Russian units near Prokhorovsk and Avdiivka face drone attack rates of up to 100 strikes per day. When each squad must operate under constant threat from above, morale and efficiency inevitably deteriorate. Socially, the pressure is visible everywhere. Polling aggregated by multiple independent researchers and referenced in major outlets shows 83% of Russians experiencing war fatigue. More than 56% report being very tired of the conflict, and for the first time since 2022, a significant share describe their living conditions as worse than before the war. Inflation and taxes erode household budgets, energy disruptions in several regions heighten frustration, and leaked regional documents show rising demand for social assistance programs. This is where the political impact becomes unavoidable. The Kremlin's legitimacy relies heavily on its image of stability. But when the war extends beyond promised timelines, when relatives of the president occupy key positions, and when battlefield reports contradict official claims, public trust erodes. A major Kremlin official's decision to warn publicly of potential civil conflict reflects the seriousness of the internal assessment. Analysts from Reuters note that Moscow rarely allows such warnings to be published unless internal metrics are signaling real danger. The most telling indicator, however, is the Kremlin's spending priorities. While economic pressure intensifies, Russia has announced record increases in funding for domestic security forces, intelligence agencies, police, and internal military units. This mirrors patterns seen in the late Soviet era, when the state prioritized internal control over economic reform. BBC analysts point out that such a shift signals fear of unrest, not confidence in military victory. Strategically, the emerging picture is bleak for Moscow. The economy is strained, the military adapts reactively rather than strategically, the public grows increasingly skeptical, and the elite fractures widen as loyalty becomes more valuable than competence. But perhaps the most dangerous impact is psychological. A nation that depends on unity to sustain a long war is now questioning its leadership, its future, and its ability to endure. History shows that once this psychological shift begins, it is difficult to reverse. And in Russia's case, the shift has already begun. The shock rippling through Russia is no longer contained within its borders. What began as an internal warning, civil conflict, elite fractures, economic strain, now echoes across NATO capitals, EU foreign ministries, Chinese strategic circles, and Middle Eastern energy markets. Major outlets including Reuters, BBC, DW, Defense News, and Jane's Defense Weekly highlight a growing consensus. Russia's instability is becoming a global variable, one that could redraw alliances, shift energy flows, and reshape military planning for years to come. NATO's immediate concern is strategic unpredictability. Historically, Russian weakness has often produced external aggression, not restraint. As Moscow struggles to sustain its operation in Ukraine, intelligence agencies across Europe warn that Kremlin decision-making may become more erratic. The alliance has increased surveillance of Russia's western military districts and expanded drone detection networks from Estonia to Poland. Analysts at Defense News emphasize that NATO's posture is no longer centered on traditional tank warfare, but on counter-drone and electronic warfare capabilities, a direct response to the drone-saturated battlefield Russia now faces daily. The United States views the situation through a broader strategic lens. With President Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, the administration prioritizes American leverage in key theaters: Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. Washington tracks Russia's economic strain closely, knowing that a weakened Kremlin will rely more heavily on China and Iran. US intelligence estimates that Russia's dependence on Chinese components for missile systems, drones, and electronics has reached its highest level since the war began. This dependency shifts the power balance in Beijing's favor, giving China unprecedented influence over Russia's defense logistics. Meanwhile, the European Union faces an energy dilemma. Ukrainian long-range drone strikes, costing between $20,000 and $50,000 each, have repeatedly hit Russian refineries worth billions. Reuters confirms that some damaged facilities process up to 600,000 barrels per day, meaning each successful strike affects both global supply and Kremlin revenue. As Russia struggles to maintain output, Middle Eastern oil producers, especially in the Gulf, gain bargaining power. Europe, having already diversified away from Russian gas, now watches closely to see whether a deeper Russian economic shock could trigger broader market instability. China, for its part, is pursuing a delicate balancing act. Beijing benefits from discounted Russian energy and increased geopolitical leverage, but it fears a sudden collapse in Moscow. A fractured Russia next to China's northern border is not an appealing scenario. Chinese security analysts emphasize that Beijing wants a weakened but predictable Russia, not a chaotic one. If Moscow spirals into crisis, China may intervene diplomatically or economically to stabilize its neighbor, not out of loyalty but out of necessity. A destabilized nuclear power on China's doorstep poses unacceptable risks. Across the Middle East, Russia's instability affects Syria, Iran, and arms flows. Western intelligence assessments shared with major outlets reveal that Russia has already reduced military shipments to allied forces in the region. Iranian-made drones now flow in the opposite direction, from Tehran to Moscow, reversing decades of arms dynamics. A Russia dependent on Iranian technology shifts the strategic landscape, forcing Israel, Saudi Arabia, and NATO partners to reassess the balance of power in the region. On the battlefield, the global shift is clearer than ever. The modern conflict in Ukraine has become a showcase for the world: cheap drones versus costly hardware. A $2,000 Ukrainian FPV drone disabling a $3 million Russian tank. A $30,000 long-range drone damaging a $1 billion oil facility. A $500 electronic warfare device jamming systems worth millions. Military strategists in Washington, Berlin, London, and Tokyo are rewriting doctrines to reflect this reality. The age of expensive, centralized, slow-moving warfare is giving way to a decentralized, drone-driven model where agility matters more than size. This is why NATO countries are accelerating drone production lines, with estimates of 1 million small drones per year becoming a shared goal by 2026. By contrast, Russia's industrial base, hampered by sanctions and internal shortages, struggles to keep pace. Jane's Defense Weekly notes that Russia's drone losses exceed 2,000 per month, while domestic production cannot match replacement rates. Looking ahead 3 to 6 months, experts envision 3 plausible scenarios. Scenario 2, sudden shock. A major battlefield loss, refinery strike, or elite defection triggers internal turmoil. The Kremlin increases repression, regions demand more autonomy, markets react sharply. Scenario 3. Unraveling spiral. Economic, military, and social stresses compound. Security forces struggle to maintain control. Long-term instability spreads from regional governments to the federal center. In every scenario, the world watches closely. A destabilized Russia reshapes NATO's strategy. A weakened Russia strengthens China's hand. And a Russia unable to sustain its war alters global energy flows, weapon supply chains, and alliances. The stakes are no longer regional. They are global. The warning signs inside Russia are no longer isolated incidents. They form a pattern that has appeared before major turning points in Russian history. A senior Kremlin official publicly breaks ranks to warn of political collapse. War bloggers accuse the government of misinformation. Drone strikes expose weaknesses in the Russian military machine. Economic strain forces factories to barter like it's the 1990s. Polls show exhaustion across the country, and elite families consolidate power while ordinary soldiers struggle on the front. Each development alone would be worrisome. Together, they paint a picture of a system under extreme pressure, one straining economically, shaken socially, and unsteady politically. Major outlets across the US and Europe confirm these trends. Analysts warn that Russia is entering a critical phase, one with long-term consequences for its leadership, its military posture, and its role in the global strategic balance. And now the world is asking the same question the Kremlin official asked in his article. Who are we? For Russia, the answer is no longer clear. Is it a unified power capable of adapting to modern warfare? Or a fragile state repeating the cycles of 1917 and 1991? The pressures are intensifying, the contradictions are deepening, and the stakes for Russia, for Ukraine, and for the entire international system are rising. As winter deepens and Ukraine continues to innovate with low-cost drones and long-range strikes, the next few months could redefine the entire conflict. Economic realities will tighten, social tensions may grow sharper, and political fault lines inside Moscow could widen further. The world watches, uncertain whether Russia can stabilize before the pressure reaches a breaking point. This leads to the open questions now shaping global debate. Will the Kremlin succeed in tightening control, or will internal fractures accelerate beyond its reach? Will Russia's economy endure another year of high wartime spending and refinery losses, or will the strain push it toward a deeper crisis? And if the pressure continues to rise, will Russia attempt to escalate the conflict or seek a way out before events spiral further? No one can predict which path Russia will take, but one thing is clear: the story is still unfolding, and its consequences will shape the future of Europe, NATO, and global security. Viewers who follow these developments will witness history in motion, uncertain, turbulent, and deeply consequential. If you want to stay ahead of the next major shift, join the conversation below. What do you think comes next? Will the Kremlin regain control or lose more ground? And how will the world respond as the pressure builds? Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay prepared, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis as this story develops.